I'm TP McIntyre. I'm author of the book My Waffles Are Cold, A Man's Guide to Abusive Women. And today we're going to talk about something that I became aware of when I was getting therapy after the relationship. And the therapist brought something to my attention that I wasn't even aware of. And that was that the narcissist attracted to certain things they saw of me that they were able to exploit. And one of these was a lack of self-esteem. Now, I never thought of myself as having a lack of self-esteem. Like I had said before in some of my videos, I traveled the country and did stress management seminars. You got to have a certain amount of good self-esteem and to do that, so I thought. But primarily what happened was after my wife died, after my wife of 30 years passed away from cancer, my self-esteem took a big hit. And that's very common with widowers who have lost their wife. If you've been with somebody that long, and as a man, I felt my job was to take care of her and provide for her, and she was a stay-at-home kind of person. And when she got sick, I became absolutely helpless except to watch her die. So after she passed away, I was at a severely emotional and vulnerability point in my life to where the narcissist saw that and was able to take advantage of it. Some of the other things I had as a result of that were anxiety and other things. But getting back to that self-esteem, that's where the honeymoon phase really sucked me in, because all of a sudden every self-esteem issues I had or sense of failure that I have, because after she died, all kinds of things are going through your mind. There may be guys listening to this right now who experienced it. And one of those things is, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Am I going to just be lonely? Am I going to... a lot of people would think, well, it's just easy, you're just going to be a widower and grieve your wife. And it's just not that simple. Men aren't really good being alone a lot of times, and especially if they've been with somebody for 30 years. And in many ways, I was dependent on my wife for companionship and many other things that are important to men. And the narcissist seemed to have latched onto that entire thing and made me feel good, made me feel wanted, made me feel needed. Listen to my story about what I went through, seemed empathetic and sympathetic. And that drew me in. It drew me in. I remember she helped me clean out the house a little bit, the things you have to do after somebody passes away that I just couldn't bring myself to do, like, getting rid of some of the clothes and some of the items that, would remind me of the marriage and of my wife. And many people think that's very healthy, and it's purely an individual thing how fast you do that. My father, I remember my mother died, he did it very quickly. And I seem to be along his ilk. It's just the way we operate, the men, at least my father and I, is to get rid of as many reminders as you can, because we're just really not good at dealing with that kind of thing. And the narcissist seemed to come in like a tornado at this point. And just kind of not only just remove clothing, but basically everything else I had in the house, and to where there was nothing else left there that reminded me of my wife. I remember even before, just within a couple of days, she was telling me of just meeting and getting together. I had pictures of my wife on the wall that she said, you should remove those, you should do this. And of course, when you get in a new relationship, that's some of the things I read that you should do. You shouldn't have, pictures of the passed away wife on bookshelves on your table, dresser drawers, or on the wall. And so I did it. But again, you have to remember, this was very early after my wife had passed away. And talking with other women that were friends of mine afterwards, they said they would have number one, they would have probably never gotten a relationship with me in the first place because I wasn't ready for it. Number two, they would have been much more understanding of what was going on and not let me move so fast. In other words, it takes a while. You just don't get over in a couple of months the death of somebody worth for 30 years. In fact, I've learned since you don't really get over it at all. There is no getting over the death of a primary, your wife or husband or whatever. You just move on. And but that's one of the things she attached to, along with other items. Anything they see on you, any kind of weakness or point, they seem to have a kind of like a radar for it. And they're intensely looking at you to see what points of those weaknesses that you have that they can exploit. And that's why when you get out of a relationship, I'm big on getting therapeutic help with it so you can identify what some of those items were. See, we tend to think that, all right, all the fault's at the narcissist. And it is, because they're the one that took advantage of us. They're the ones that abused us. But it's not our fault. But we need to find out where our weaknesses are so we can shore it up, because there's a good chance, and a lot of people do get into, especially if they don't heal correctly, they can find themselves right in another relationship just like they just left. Maybe somebody not as intense, maybe somebody more intense. I mean, I'm sure you've seen people ask the question, why do I always attract the losers? And because you've never really healed from one loser to the next. If I'm attacked once, using, I'm an old military guy, using a term that says, well, I'm attacked on this wall every day at 5 o'clock and it's breached at this point, I got to do one or two things. Either I got to get out of there so I don't get breached again, or I got to shore up that point in the wall so it doesn't get breached. And it's the same thing. Through my therapy, I learned the things I need to work on. I learned the things that I need to shore up in my life so that it doesn't happen again. And that was the biggest therapeutic thing I got from my therapy and working on my own recovery, so that I'm not I'm not really, now I'm in a new marriage, first of all, and I'm not the cheating kind or running around kind, so I'm not really worried about running into another psychopath, narcopath, or whatever the flavor is. Because my present wife doesn't have any of those issues. But I'm saying to you, had I not got married again and gone through my healing, my radars would have been definitely out. Looking for whatever kind of sign. In other words, I wouldn't have missed the flags I had missed the first time around. Because after being married 30 years with somebody who didn't have these issues, I missed all the flags that the narc was sending me. And there were a lot of them. If you look back on a relationship, there are flags all over the place. And you think back and say, I must have been blind and see all those flags. But they were all over the place. And you're like, maybe even down on yourself a little bit, thinking, I didn't see this, I never saw this coming until it was too late. Well, if you're out of the relationship, either you got dumped or you walked out. You don't have to get in one of those again. But you need to find out what those problems that you had getting into, what were those weak points in the wall that allowed you to be taken advantage of. And again, that comes through it. It doesn't necessarily have to have therapy on it. Some people don't want therapy, don't like therapy. What therapy does is make the process of healing go faster and more efficient. There's a lot of information on the web, and I'm not a big fan of self-diagnosis, okay? And the simple reason is, it's just like when somebody has an ailment and first thing they do is they go looking on Google, and before you know it, they have a brain tumor when they just have a headache. You can overshoot the thing. If you don't have any medical training, I mean, we're all smart, we can figure things out, but we don't have the medical training to actually diagnose ourselves, and it's very self-dangerous. And so is, self-diagnosing ourselves with any kind of issues we may have. Made a post on the Waffles page today about knowing what post-traumatic stress disorder is, but to be diagnosed by it, you have to have a doctor diagnose it. You can't self-diagnose you. You can't get any medications for it, and you can't get any help for it. And not everybody that comes out of an abusive relationship is going to have post-traumatic stress. They may have other issues that are related to it, look like it, but are not actually post-traumatic stress. And getting the proper diagnosis and the proper treatment is essential to your healing. So if you find out what these things are, and you're still out of a relationship, you're still trying to heal, and you're still working with your trust issues, which is very, very common. You still feel you can't trust anybody. And, that's one of the primary things I learned in my therapy, was learning how to trust people again. Mine was so bad I really couldn't even go to a supermarket checkout store if there was a lady behind the counter or just say anybody that started talking to me, because now officially I was single, so somebody would say, you want to go out for coffee or something later on, and I just said no, I'd rather not, because I just didn't trust. I didn't trust women. I didn't trust men. I didn't trust anybody. Being abused is a horrible experience, and I simply just didn't trust anybody. It ruined all my trust. I guess I was one of my biggest problems. I was a little bit too naive at the goodness of people. And then I learned that by and large, most people are good. This was just one experience with one person. Not everybody's out to get me. I'm not that important. So, most now, my trust issues were solved. I got remarried, and again, I basically went back to kind of a trust but verify with people still. But I don't generally have a trust issue with everybody. Once you earn my trust, you have my trust. If you violate the trust, then you violated my trust, and I think that's a good, healthy boundary to have. Just ask people to be honest with me, and I try to be honest with them. So if you're in the relationship still, you can still go back and look at how did I get into this relationship? In the book I talk about journaling, your relationship. And you can do this while or out of the relationship. It's especially effective if you start to become aware while you're in the relationship. And that's what I did. That's what finally gave me the courage to walk out, was I began to read about narcissism, because as I explained in the book, I had a 3-day stay in a mental health facility because I had a complete mental breakdown, and the lady, my counselor in there, had told me that I was likely with a narcissist after I described my story. And so I started studying this because really I had no clue what it was. And as I began to go through it and I began to see what kind of relationship I was in, then I began to come to the conclusion I couldn't go on. And while I was scared, everybody is when you end a relationship, I still had some major issues that came from watching my wife die and then going into this horrible relationship. I just took the courage and I moved forward. It's like I told you in the video about just making a choice and you're a survivor. I just got up and started doing something about it instead of laying there and getting whacked around. So I did, and I started studying, and then once I studied it, I became more aware of that. And just like I got that information, I also, after getting out of a relationship, continued my therapy and was be able to go back and look at the things that got me into it in the first place, to make sure I can inoculate myself against any further abuse by anyone, relationship or otherwise. There's plenty of narcissistic abuse and borderline abuse and all kinds of abuse out there. Your boss can abuse you, coworkers can abuse you, people in general can abuse you, and a relationship can abuse you. So you want to be inoculated against that. And the way to do that is to find out what all those underlying issues are and get them worked on and solved so that you don't find yourself in this mess ever again. Again, I'm T.P. McIntyre, author of the book, My Waffles Are Cold, A Man's Guide to Abusive Women. And thanks for listening in, and I'll be back with another video shortly.